currently have 9 water tanks and 1 secondary reservoir, which provide and store about 26 million gallons worth of water at any given time. 8 pump stations, 6 wells, a spring, about 330 miles of pipe, close to 20,000 connections between the 2 culinary and secondary, 2,500 fire hydrants, and over 7,000 valves. A lot of other miscellaneous items to control pressures and things like that.
Welcome to Herrimanology,
the official podcast to keep up with Herriman City.
We'll take you inside the city, explore the latest news and updates, show you how your government operates, and discuss the issues that affect us all. Now, here are your hosts talking all things Herriman on Herrimanology.
All right, welcome to Herrimanology. It is Friday, March 8th, and hopefully everybody has more or less emerged from the hordes of tumbleweeds that have come through our city in the last little bit. My yard was no exception. So if you have any issues, good luck, I guess. If you
and feel free to reach out to the city if you need some help with those as well, because we can bring dumpsters to your house, and you can load them yourself, and we can pick them up and once you're done. So feel free to do that.
Your crews have been busy this week.
We have. It's been a busy week. We've had 6 to 8 people out every day, helping clean up tumbleweeds and deliver dumpsters. So feel free to reach out if you need some help.
That's great. I'm John LaFollette, Communications Manager for the city. Alongside today, our Director of Public Works, Justun Edwards. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, you bet. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk a lot about water today, both the water fees from the City Council discussion last week and water quality. We have a lot of other topics that we could talk about, like a new business ribbon cutting for Aspire Surgical. Congratulations to them. We're not going to go into a whole lot of depth about that today. There's some UDOT projects. Check our social media. We'll go into more depth another time. But today we're focusing on water. So we did a podcast last week with Councilmember Hodges, talking about the water fee discussion in the City Council meeting. And understandably, when people hear, oh, your water fees are probably going to go up.
Yeah.
That doesn't sit well.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
But that's just, costs are going up all over the place.
They are. We're seeing it. We've seen it over the last 3 years, and I know that's not unique to Herriman. Everybody is seeing that, from residents to private businesses, right? And we've seen, general costs across the board go up, just in, materials we purchase, those types of things. So, yeah, it's not unique to us. And unfortunately, this is something that we need to do to be able to maintain the water system and moving forward and deliver water to people. So if you don't mind, maybe I'll first start off by just giving a little background and information about our water system.
Yeah.
So we currently have 9 water tanks and 1 secondary reservoir through the system, which provide and store about 26 million gallons worth of water at any given time. We have 8 pump stations, 6 wells, a spring, about 330 miles of pipe, and that's including both culinary and secondary water. Coming up close to 20,000 connections between the 2 culinary and secondary, and 2,500 fire hydrants and over 7,000 valves. And then there's a lot of other miscellaneous items in the water system to control pressures and things like that. So
it can be easy from a resident's perspective. At my house too, you turn on the tap and water comes out, and you think water's cheap, relatively. Like you pay a little bit every month, but your water comes out and it almost feels free.
Yeah.
But in reality, water is incredibly expensive to deliver for municipalities who do that service.
Yeah. And all water purveyors understand this. It's just like any business. A lot of times you go and you don't understand why things cost so much, but you don't understand the background and why they do. And there is a lot that goes into a water system. Like I said, I just talked about all that infrastructure, and that infrastructure is not cheap to construct, and it is not cheap to maintain. And over time, just like your car or your home, you need to maintain it and repair and replace things, and those costs are going up as well.
So last week, a consultant, Bowen Collins, gave a presentation in the City Council work meeting. We talked about it in last week's podcast too, but kind of illustrating, to be frank, kind of a bleak, if we don't make any changes to water fees and water revenues, it doesn't look good on financial charts. So they suggested maybe a few alternatives
Right.
A few options that the city council is still considering. But maybe a kind of a summary of what that was all about.
Yeah. So we try to do these water rate studies every 4 to 5 years. And unfortunately, since the last time we've done a water rate study in 2019, we've seen huge inflationary costs and construction costs and those things. And so, the upcoming water rate increase does look like it'll be quite substantial. But just in general, a lot of the things that water rate study covered were exactly inflationary costs, and that is anywhere from purchasing materials to repair and replacement. Obviously, labor costs have increased. We've seen that across the board. It's difficult for a city to keep up or compete with the private sector, and to be able to retain and attract employees, quality employees. It's been difficult to do so. We've seen utility costs, power costs. We use a lot of power to pump water and move water, and those costs have increased. And then obviously gas and all the other utilities we utilize have increased. One of the biggest things that has increased substantially over the last 3 years is we've seen construction costs for water infrastructure in particular in some areas go up 65%.
Wow.
And that is due to labor costs, material costs, fuel costs. All of those things are contributing to those. And so our capital infrastructure, it has become a lot more expensive than in years past.
So what are some of the options that the city can take to get us out of a financial issue going forward to make this sustainable?
So a couple options that were presented by Bowen Collins that the city council are entertaining is we could just do a rip off the Band-Aid approach, and that looks like it would likely be an 80 to 85% increase, which obviously is not feasible or reasonable.
Right.
So another option that is more reasonable but will still hurt is looking at an increase over the next 4 or 5 years that would be in the range of around 13% for the next 3 years, and then about a 10% in the fourth year. And after that, it's kind of just projecting what revenues are needed, but then it would start to taper off down to 3 to 5% to maintain and catch up from kind of the deficit you alluded to. Is we have been reaching into our reserves to be able to maintain and operate the system, and so our reserve funds have been depleted, and to try and recoup some of those reserve funds and then keep up with inflation and the growing capital costs.
And some people think too, and we'll move on to water quality here, but some people think too that why can't you just cut from X column in the city and subsidize the water fund, if you will? And technically that is possible, but the city prefers to budget in a way where things that have revenue and expenses kind of in the same category, like the water fund, there's water revenue from fees that residents pay and water expenses. You try to keep that together and match it up to make it sustainable.
Correct. Yeah, we want the water fund to stand on its own. We want the general fund to stand on its own, just like the other departments and funds throughout the city. You want them to be able to stand alone. And so subsidizing from one department to the other might help in the short term, but in the long term that doesn't work out.
Yeah. So we're not going to guess exactly what the city council is going to end up deciding. That decision hasn't been made yet. It won't for some time, but keep an eye on city council agendas. It's going to come up again in the future. We'll make you painfully aware of the information as it comes out. So we had a question. We can make this our no dumb questions for the week from Garrett, and this is one that comes up a lot. Garrett asked, I'm curious if there are any published studies on the Herriman City water quality. I don't know about other households, but it seems water softeners are a necessity in the city, and the water is definitely not drinkable. So first, yes, we do have a water quality report. We publish it every year, usually late spring, early summer, and it's reporting on the previous year's water quality.
Correct.
And as far as drinkability, taste is kind of subjective.
Yeah.
I've lived in a couple places in Herriman. Where I live now, the water tastes fine to me. Mm-hmm. Where I lived before, not so much. My wife did the bottled water thing, which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
That's something that a lot of residents face. Why is the water hard? Why might it taste like that? What are some of the factors that contribute to that?
Yeah, so those are generally the complaints we get are aesthetic complaints. They're not really harmful complaints, we go out and we do test water for people that are concerned. But in general, it is just due to aesthetics and taste and smell. Sometimes look, depending, sometimes when you freeze the water for ice and then it melts in a cup, a lot of times you might see, things floating in the cup, and that is essentially just minerals. And for the most part, that is made up by calcium and magnesium. That is just the general geology in the ground. The water saturates those minerals. We pump it out of the ground from our wells, and essentially it's just those dissolved solids in the water, generally calcium, magnesium.
And Herriman water is really hard, which is not news to anybody here. So you mentioned total dissolved solids. That's
Correct.
A factor that is regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency and the state of Utah.
Yep.
There's another measurement, grains per gallon, that kind of measures water hardness in general.
Correct.
If you look at a scale of what is considered soft water, kind of medium, I guess, hard water, kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 10 grains per gallon is generally considered hard.
Correct.
And that's kind of the low end of what we see in here.
Yeah, that is the very low end. So our wells will range, anywhere between 30 and 60 grains per gallon. The water we get from Jordan Valley is fairly consistent, and it is generally in that 15 grains per gallon range. And so the water in Utah, especially in the southwest part of the Salt Lake Valley, is just historically and just in general hard. It's not unique to Herriman. And the water that we get from Jordan Valley, much of that is surface water runoff that comes from, Deer Creek Reservoir, the Provo River. They also have some wells here that they blend as well. So, but the groundwater in the southwest corner of the Salt Lake Valley is just hard because there's a lot of the calcium and mineral deposits there.
And that can change different parts of the year too. At least in years past, typically in the summer it's less hard because we get more water from Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. Because we don't have enough water from our own wells to support the total summer demand, correct?
Correct.
And in the winter, we don't need as much Jordan Valley water, or haven't, so we lean more on the wells. People notice the water changes over.
Correct.
It's harder there.
Yeah, and so we do, it's kind of a balancing act in what we consider those shoulder seasons, the spring and fall. Like you alluded to, we use a lot more Jordan Valley in the summertime, which brings our overall TDS levels down. Then in the wintertime, that generally shifts to where we are using more of our own well water. And we still blend it to be able to bring those TDS levels down.
And blending meaning mixing the water from our local wells with the Jordan Valley water to kind of dilute it.
Our sources pump into storage tanks where we have two sources, our sources and then Jordan Valley, and we try and control how much of each goes into a tank to blend. It's not a perfect science. The water doesn't always perfectly blend depending on the demands. But so there will be times of the year where we're making those transitions that some people will see higher levels of TDS, and we see it every year. Generally in the fall is when we see it more. And so it's just a few weeks to make some of those adjustments to get those down. But in the wintertime, it has historically been harder water. And there are pockets of the city that will receive more of our groundwater than others, and other areas will see more Jordan Valley.
The city council did talk about this recently. How do we get to a point where our water's less hard outside of the peak demand season?
Yep.
What did they talk about there?
And so we presented a few options to the city council that they considered. Several of them were, do we just move forward the way we are, operating to where we will have some of those inconsistencies throughout the year, or do we want to make an adjustment to where we go and we shut off our sources during the wintertime? Generally, it would be between October and April timeframe, depending on the demands, and then use solely Jordan Valley throughout the wintertime. And the city council determined that that was the best option to move forward with. And so coming up this next fall is the first time we'll implement that. This year we have started blending a little bit more Jordan Valley water, and so some people may have seen some lower TDS levels and more Jordan Valley water throughout the system later on this winter. But moving forward, we will be going Jordan Valley in the wintertime.
And there's a bit of a drawback to that too, because using our own sources locally is going to be cheaper.
Yeah, it's much cheaper.
By 3 to 4 times or so.
Yeah. So generally our average production cost for our own sources is somewhere around $170 per acre foot. Purchasing water from Jordan Valley is somewhere around $690 per acre foot. And so there's a drastic contrast between those two. And that is one of the reasons we've tried to utilize our own sources, was to try and minimize those potential rate increases or just overall water costs to our residents. And I will say that there are some costs that the residents are seeing from that lower water costs, or I guess I would say the higher TDS is, it does impact your household appliances and things like that. So there are maintenance costs that our residents are seeing due to that. So I don't know if they'll 100% offset each other, but with this change, you should be able to start seeing some of those maintenance costs go down.
Let's talk about one more thing with testing. So in the water quality report, there's a huge table of all these. They're called contaminants. I don't really like that word personally, because just substances might be a better word. Because there are regulated, we'll use their term contaminants in water, that there are regulated levels that the EPA and the state of Utah set.
Correct.
And all those have certain testing parameters with frequency, and it has to be below this level for it to be considered safe. And by the way, Herriman is well within all of those regulations. So even if water's hard, it's safe to drink. But do you test outside of those minimum federal requirements? What are some of the testing patterns that Herriman does?
Yeah, so we do test more frequently than we are required to do so. And some of those might be just because we have a complaint in a certain area, and we might want to go out and just test just to see what's in the water. Or we might just do some testing to better understand our water sources. And so we will test more frequently than the requirements. But in general, we do test, our distribution system for different things. The main thing that we test for in our distribution system are bacterial samples. And we take 70 of those throughout the system every month. We test chlorine, we test fluoride frequently throughout the system. Now we have requirements of how often we need to test those things, but we do test those more often than required. And then we also are required to test all of our sources, and those frequencies, range from anywhere from every quarter or every month all the way out to potentially every 6 years. But that is just the reason we get those. They're called reduced sampling, and it's because we're not seeing those potential contaminants in the water. And so the testing frequency, is further out because of that.
So Justun, to prepare for this, came up with several pages of notes. This is amazing stuff for anybody who is curious. We don't have time to go over everything, but we are going to put this on the website.
Yeah.
So if you have any more questions about things we've talked about today, we'll be uploading this to herriman.org/water, or one of the sub pages there. So if you're curious about water hardness, water quality, water testing, it's going to be there. So I appreciate you going through all that work.
Yeah, you bet.
This is something. It's something we get asked about as a city a lot, and you get many more phone calls than I ever do.
Yeah. Yep.
And that is all for today. That went really fast. Appreciate you listening, paying attention, or watching. If you have any questions, as always, leave a comment in whatever comment section you're listening to this on. We'll forward it to Justun and his team and get you an answer. If you have questions about anything else, those are always fair game too. So thanks for Justun to come in today, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thanks, John.